think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
In this episode, I'm going to go back in time and talk about some strange experiences I had growing up before I made contact with my spirit guide. As a child, I had an interest in the mysterious and unexplained, not because it can be frightening, but basically because I was ravenous for new information and discoveries. At a very young age, I was absolutely obsessed with animals and nature, devouring books on biology and especially animals. But when I felt that I had grasped a great deal of the basic knowledge about nature, my interest turned to dinosaurs. It didn't take me long to become bored with dinosaurs, though. So my interest turned to the gigantic invertebrates that generally preceded the dinosaurs and the large extinct mammals that follow them. When I learned all that I could find out about those guys, I became interested in the animals that may or may not exist at all. The cryptids like the Sasquatch, giant sea beasts, and lake monsters. Of course, reading books about cryptozoology naturally led to the subject of the paranormal, which absolutely fascinated me. Finally, I could research a subject which maintained an air of mystery and constant discovery. For instance, there are many more theories about the nature of a haunting than there are about the nature of a Brazilian tree frog. At first, my parents wouldn't let me get books about ghosts and hauntings when I was very young, not because they thought that they would frighten me, but because they were Christians in the height of the 1980 satanic panic epidemic. So any media regarding anything that could be construed as spiritual was forbidden. Unless it was the Bible, of course. They couldn't suppress it for very long, however. In fact, I eventually went on to do my sophomore high school year-long massive research project on the paranormal. Along with this interest in the unknown, I had some strange experiences growing up. Not all of them I remember myself. I'll get to those after the news section of the podcast. Before that, I want to add that in addition to the sources for the news section, which I have already listed on a previous episode, I will also be reading from the fantastic book Beyond the Occult by Colin Wilson. It's one of the best books of its kind that I've read. It is skeptical but open-minded and also comprehensive and intelligent. I highly recommend it. And that will be one of the books that I will be taking news stories from in subsequent episodes as well. All right, and now, the news.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
In August 1914, in the Georgian Bay in Canada, William J. Keel and 7 other persons saw a spherical craft on the surface of the water. On its deck were 2 small men wearing green-purple clothes. They seemed to be busy with a hose plunging it into the water. On the opposite side were 3 men dressed in light brown, wearing square masks down to their shoulders. Seeing the witnesses, they re-entered the craft except for one dwarf wearing shoes with a curved pointed tip, who remained outside while the craft rose 3 meters above the water and shot upward, leaving a short trail. On August 21, 1915, in Gallipoli, Turkey, during severe fighting in the Dardanelles, a peculiar cloud engulfed a British regiment, which was never seen again. This was observed by 22 men of the 1st Field Company, New Zealand Army Corps, and stated in an affidavit. In October 1917, in Youngstown, Pennsylvania, John Boback, 17, was walking along the railroad tracks between Youngstown and Mount Braddock when he saw a saucer-shaped object with a platform and rows of lights sitting in a field 30 meters to his left. He watched the object for 1 to 2 minutes until it took off with a high-pitched sound, rising gradually like a slow plane. Its size was that of an average car. The top of the object was a dome with elongated windows through which figures could be seen. In 1921, in Marseille, France, there was an undocumented report of an abduction by 2 beings. On February 22, 1922, at still 500 hours in Hubble, Nebraska, William C. Lamb was following strange tracks when he heard a high-pitched sound and saw a circular object intercepting starlight. It became brilliantly lighted and landed in a hollow. Soon afterward, a creature over 2.4 meters tall was seen flying from the direction where the object had landed. It left tracks in the snow, which Lamb followed without results. On September 9, 1922, in Barmouth, Wales, John Morris and William James saw an object fall into the ocean so slowly that it was thought to be a plane. A boat was sent out, but nothing was found. On June 22nd, 1929, 2300 hours in Ferme-Neuve, Canada, Lévis Brossard, 20, was returning home when he saw a dark object with a yellow light, and his horse became very nervous. Within 6 meters of the object, 4 or 5 dwarfish figures were running back and forth. He heard their pointed, childlike voices, then saw the dark object take off with a machine-like sound and a rush of air. Estimated size of object, 15 meters diameter, 5 meters high. In July 1929, in Robsart, Canada, 5 persons, among them Einar Rostovold, saw a huge ball of light giving off fiery colors 25 kilometers from Robsart. It landed slowly, vanished gradually after illuminating the whole countryside for 30 minutes. In the summer of 1933, in the morning, in Chrisville, Pennsylvania, a man observed a faint violet light in a field between this town and Morristown. Walking to it, he found an ovoid object 3 meters in diameter and 2 meters thick, with a circular opening similar to a vault door. Pushing it, he found the room full of violet light and observed many instruments. No occupant. Smell of ammonia. In the fall of 1938, in Juminda, on the Estonian coast, 2 persons saw a strange frogman, 1 meter tall, with a round head, no neck, and a hump in front of the body. The mouth was a large, strange slit, the eyes were like smaller slits, the skin was brown-green compared to pegamoid, and the hands were normal. The creature walked in a peculiar but elegant fashion, the head waving up and down, while the legs moved carefully. When pursued, the creature accelerated very fast, with feet fluttering about 100 meters away. It vanished completely. Okay, now some quick reports of some strange events from Belgium. In Brussels, luminous area 25 feet long, 5 feet high, seen in street. It became phosphorescent green, vibrated, changed shape, and moved away. It was formed of tiny luminous particles. 24th January 1970. In Etterbeek, small stones, black and sticky, fell from the sky for several seconds. 12th July 1975. In Huy, cigar-shaped UFO landed and 2 entities were seen on board. 9th October 1954. The River Moss, near Ombret, 3-foot crocodile seen in the river, discarded pet alligator, 6 August 1979. In Marcinay, near Charleroi, 300 stones thrown at house over 4 days, but no human agent found, although the police investigated, 30th January to 2nd February 1913. In Sarthe, substance that smelled like glue fell from sky, 8th June 1901. Near Warneton, man driving at night saw landed UFO in field, then 2 entities approaching car, both wearing helmets. They seemed to try to communicate before returning to craft, 7th January 1974. Between Wasme and Aldemey, man's clothing burst when he approached UFO landed on road at night, giving off bright light, 14th November 1954. In Wilsel, rains of stones on 4 houses, made of July 1973. Now just some strange events from Belize. In the Maya Mountains, in forest at foot of mountains, local forestry officers saw little people below 4 feet 6 inches tall, hair-covered, known as duendes, who live in the forests of the south. In San Antonio, couple and granddaughter pelted by small stones, outdoors and indoors, 1981. Now in Bolivia, in Lake Origueira, reports of gigantic fish which capsized canoes. In Oruro, radio technician claimed abduction by UFO entities who examined him and gave him a message, 15th August 1980. Now in Borneo, in the Lawas River, reports of monster with cow-like head, eyes like light bulbs, and big neck. May 1985. On August 1st, 1965, a 15-year-old boy named Alberto San Roma Nuez told the police in Lima, Peru that he had been on the roof of his house taking in the wash when a saucer-like thing landed near him and discharged a 3 1/2 foot tall being who had greenish lights on his skin that made him look like a frog. Terrified, Alberto ran for the stairs. As he did, a red light from the object enveloped him for a moment, and then it flew away, heading for the ocean. Police later found 4 circular marks, each a foot in diameter, on the roof. Another rooftop landing, also in Lima, occurred on August 24, 1965, when 20 students and their adult teachers heard some strange sounds on top of their school. They went to the roof and discovered a throbbing disc-shaped object, which then took off as they all ran for cover. There have been many landings and sightings around schools all over the world. The sensational, much-publicized sightings in Hillsdale, Michigan in 1966 took place directly in front of a dormitory on a college campus, and hundreds of children, teachers, and nearby adult residents saw circular, seemingly metallic objects hovering low over the Crestview Elementary School, Miami, Florida on 6 April 1967. On October 4, 1965, 3 hysterical children charged into the office of the headmaster of the Liberator General San Martin School in Salta, Argentina, and told him that several short, ugly, greenish monsters had attacked them and tried to catch them while they were walking to school. The story was nothing new to the headmaster, as he had told reporters he had heard the same sort of thing before about 2 years earlier. In 1965, Argentine shopkeeper Felipe Martinez claimed 3 separate encounters with a little man, a yard high, who wore a quote-unquote diver's costume and helmet and spoke Portuguese slowly with difficulty. Martinez said that they asked him to help them gain recognition, but he told them that all he could do was to report the meeting to a radio station. Later, after another alleged meeting, he said he was taken aboard a saucer with 4 crewmen, all less than a meter in height, less than 39 inches, while a thick occupant was a blond man about 6 feet tall. On that occasion, he said the crewmen put a spacesuit on him, but it caused his heart to pump so rapidly that he had to take it off. On August 14, 1965, at João do Rio, a railway worker was fishing on the river Paraíba near the village of Cruzeiros in Brazil when a saucer-like object landed nearby, and a tiny man, 70 centimeters high, or 28 inches, with big luminous eyes addressed him in perfect Portuguese. He said he was from quote-unquote another world and authorized Rio to tell whomever he pleased. Then he handed the astonished fisherman a small metal disc, said he would return, hopped back into his saucer and flew off. The young witness reportedly turned the disc over to the authorities for analysis, and that's the last he heard of it. On August 19, 1965, near the National Polytechnic Institute in Mexico City, 2 students, Yago and Payo Rodriguez, said that at 8:30 a.m. that morning, a luminous domed disc landed on tripod legs near them, and 2 small creatures about 80 centimeters or 31 inches tall and wearing gas masks got out, dropped the metal plate in front of them, and flew off again. Investigators found the grass was burned at the alleged landing site, and there were marks where the tripod legs had rested. Drops of a strange fluid were also found. Similar fluids have been found at many other UFO landing sites. It consists of alumina and silicon. The metal plate was turned over to the laboratory of the National Polytechnic Institute, and nothing further was said about it. During the summer of 1987, a team of scientists from Peking University, or Beijing University, led by biologist Professor Chen Mok-chun, traveled to some deep freshwater pools near Wunan, Hubei province, in order to film the area and its wildlife. While setting up their television cameras, however, they were treated to an exhibition of local wildlife, far beyond anything that even their wildest imaginations could have conceived. In full view of the 9 scientists, 3 huge creatures rose out of the pools and moved towards them. Their stunned eyewitnesses likened them to giant toad-like beasts with grayish-white skins, mouths that were 6 feet across, and eyes larger than rice bowls. According to Professor Chen, these grotesque creatures silently watched the scientists for a short time. Then one of the creatures opened its mouth and extended an enormously long tongue, which it wrapped around the cameras on tripods. As it promptly engulfed the tripods, its 2 companions let forth some eldritch screams, and then all 3 monsters submerged, disappearing from view. The delayed shock reaction experienced by the scientists was so great that one of them dropped to his knees and was physically sick, according to Chinese reports, summarized in various overseas versions, including one by reporter George Glidden that appeared in a U.S. newspaper titled The Examiner for August 11, 1987. The Russian newspaper Izvestia reported in June 1987 the case of a woman named Yulia Vorobyeva, 37 years old, who was pronounced dead after receiving a 380-volt electric shock in March 1978. She recovered after 2 days in the morgue, but was unable to sleep for the next 6 months. Then she sank into a long sleep and awoke to discover that she had acquired paranormal powers. Quote, I went shopping one morning. I got to the bus stop and a woman was standing there. Suddenly, I was struck by horror. I thought I could see right through this woman like a television screen, end quote. When Izvestia's reporter interviewed her, she looked at his stomach and told him correctly what he had had for lunch. Within seconds of meeting a doctor, she was able to tell him that one ear was weaker than the other and that the same was true of his eyes. Significantly, Vorobyeva also states that she can see ultraviolet rays from the sun. In 1828, a youth named Caspar Hauser walked into Nuremberg with bleeding feet, and it soon became clear that he had been kept captive in a darkened room since birth. Physicians who examined him discovered that as a result, he was able to read aloud from the Bible in a completely dark room and see the heat from a stove long before it had become red hot. The biologist Ivan Sanderson records an interesting experience in the final chapter of More Things, a book concerned mainly with zoological oddities. After stating that he has never been interested in the occult, he tells how he and his wife were living in Haiti, engaged in a biological survey. One day on a drive to Lake Azoué, They made the mistake of taking a shortcut that landed them up to their ankles in mud and had to spend most of the night walking back. Sanderson and his wife were walking together, their assistant Frederick G. Alsop walking up ahead when, quote, "Suddenly, on looking up from the dusty ground, I perceived absolutely clearly in the now brilliant moonlight and casting shadows appropriate to their positions 3-storied houses of various shapes and sizes lining both sides of the road. These houses hung out over the road, which suddenly appeared to be muddy with patches of large cobblestones. The houses were of, I would say, about the Elizabethan period of England, but for some reason I knew they were in Paris. They had pent roofs with some dormer windows, gables, timbered porticos, and small windows with tiny leaded panes. Here and there were dull, reddish lights burning behind them as if from candles. There were iron-framed lanterns hanging from timbers jutting from some houses, and they were all swaying together as if in a wind, but there was not the faintest movement of air about us. I was marveling at this and looking about me when my wife came to a dead stop and gave a gasp. I ran smack into her. Then she went speechless for a time while I begged to know what was wrong. Finally, she took my hand and, pointing, described to me exactly what I was seeing, at which point I became speechless. Finally, pulling myself together, I blurted out something like, "What do you think's happened?" But my wife's reply startled me even more. I remember it only too well. She said, "How did we get to Paris 500 years ago?" We stood marveling at what we apparently both now saw, picking out individual items and pointing, questioning each other as to details and so forth. Curiously, we found ourselves swaying back and forth and began to feel very weak, so I called out to Fred, whose white shirt was fast disappearing ahead. I don't quite remember what happened then, but we tried to run towards him and, feeling dizzy, sat down on what we were convinced was a tall, rough curbstone. Fred came running back, asking what was wrong, but at first we did not know what to say. He was the keeper of the cigarettes, of which we had about half a dozen left. He sat down beside us and gave us each one. By the time the flame from his lighter had cleared from my eyes, so had 15th century Paris, and there was nothing before me but the endless and damned thorn bushes and cactus and bare earth. My wife also came back after looking into the flame. Fred had seen nothing. End quote. On May 4th, 1969, in Bebedouro, Minas Gerais, Brazil, Jose Antonio da Silva, an enlisted soldier in the military police and an orderly assigned to Major Celio Ferreira, was fishing on a lagoon on a Sunday afternoon. Suddenly he heard voices, became aware of figures moving behind him, and felt a burst of light strike his leg. Da Silva dropped his fishing pole and fell to his knees. Two beings, about 4 feet tall, wearing aluminum-like suits and what appeared to be helmets, seized him and dragged him to an object sitting on a dirt road. The object was shaped like an upright cylinder and had black platforms at each end. The soldier was taken inside, where the beings put one of their helmets on him. It was round in back, square in front with sharp edges, and flat from the forehead down, but with a projection for the nose and round inch-wide holes for the eyes. Da Silva felt the craft rise. The beings talked animatedly among themselves in a language he did not recognize. After a long period of travel, he felt a jarring that suggested their craft had landed. The soldier was then blindfolded and led to a large room where they removed the wrap from his eyes. A being stood in front of him who was extremely hairy and slightly taller than the rest. His waist-long hair was reddish and wavy. His wide-set eyebrows were 2 fingers thick and ran nearly straight across the forehead. His skin was light-colored and pale. His deep-set eyes were greenish and round and slightly larger than a human's. His ears were also bigger, and so was his long and pointed nose. The being's mouth was wide and like a fish's. When the others took off their helmets, they were of similar appearance. Da Silva watched as the beings, at one point more than a dozen, examined his fishing equipment and took one of every item he had in duplicate. Later, the witness noticed, on a low shelf, the bodies of 4 human men, 1 black, and became terribly frightened. Later still, the beings gave him a dark green liquid to drink out of a cubical stone glass. The dwarf leader then began a strange conversation with the soldier, mostly about weapons, which was conducted entirely with gestures and drawings. Da Silva also understood that they wanted him to help in their relations with humans. When the soldier refused, the dwarf snatched the crucifix from the rosary Da Silva always carried with him. As the soldier began praying, a Christ-like figure appeared to him, making revelations. Shortly afterward, Da Silva was returned to Earth. As the machine landed, he lost consciousness and woke up near the town of Vitoria, about 250 miles from where he had been fishing. He had a swollen knee and 3 open wounds on his shoulders where the helmet had rubbed against his skin. He had been away 4.5 days.
is a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out of you.
When I was a very young child in preschool, I remember looking through a book that was basically watercolor paintings of animals. I was terrified when I turned a page and saw a painting of a horrible creature. It was wrinkled and emaciated like an old hag. It had large, malicious yellow eyes with slit pupils and very long and ragged hair. The name under the painting read Demon. I shut the book and quickly put it back and told my mom about it when she came to pick me up. So she looked through the book with the teacher, but the portrait of the quote-unquote demon wasn't there anymore. The gremlin on the wing of the airplane in the John Lithgow version of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet on the Twilight Zone movie really reminded me of what that quote-unquote demon in that picture looked like. When I was about the same age, I have a strange memory of seeing a very tall and skinny man walking out of the woods. He reminded me of a stick figure drawing. I also remember seeing a luminous being floating over my bed looking at me. It reminded me of the fetus at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. I have another much more vivid memory of waking up to see a very bright, beautiful golden light in my bedroom. The last thing I remember about that is pulling the cover over my head. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I suffered a bout of very strange and sometimes indescribable experiences. My parents told me that I complained about a monster that was harassing me at night in the bedroom, so my brother and I slept in my father's study for a while. I don't remember telling them about a monster, but I do have a vague impression of memories of a little goblin man that lived on the other side of my wall. Also, I remember waking up one morning and hearing a high-pitched, mischievous-sounding laugh in the room. Kind of like a a typical trickster goblin type laugh. There were nights sleeping in my dad's office when I would be driven into a panic by dreams which are of an indescribable nature. They weren't normal nightmares. The closest I can come to describing them is that they were like something whispering quiet yet terribly loud songs into my ear. And then those horrible little songs would repeat in my head until I'd have an anxiety attack and run to my parents pleading for help. I would also wake up sometimes feeling extremely bizarre and out of it in a way I couldn't explain to my parents. I know now that it was very similar to waking up into a full-on psychedelic trip. I also remember having strange experiences trying to go to sleep, the most memorable being the sensation of tumbling forward in a sub-sleep state. I now know that the same tumbling forward sensation is known to be a part of the process of beginning an out-of-body experience, or astral projection. My parents were, understandably, very concerned, so my daily life became a long series of test after test. Psychological tests, x-rays, brain scans of different kinds, the whole deal. They found absolutely nothing wrong with my mind or my brain, so they blamed it all on the only abnormality they discovered in all of the tests, that I seemed to be getting over a mild sinus infection. That's all. Thankfully, though, the very extreme events eventually stopped. Throughout my life, however, I have had sinus problems, and the doctors always say the same thing, that I seem to be getting over a sinus infection, never that I currently have one. I've come to understand that chronic sinus problems are a recurrent trait in shamans, spiritually sensitive people, and alien abductees.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon. That little girl got lost under the bed and she went into an alternate dimension.
This article is titled Mind Over Matter. Princeton and Russian scientists reveal the secrets of human aura and intentions. It was written by Joe Martino on September 5th, 2013. A Russian scientist has been studying the human energy field and is claiming that people can change the world simply by using their own energy. While this idea is not new, not too many have taken the time to scientifically go about proving such ideas, although the field of quantum physics has shed some powerful light on the topic over the years. Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, professor of physics at St. Petersburg State Technical University, states that when we think positive and negative thoughts, each have a different impact on our surrounding environment. Quote, "We are developing the idea that our consciousness is part of the material world, and that with our consciousness, we can directly influence our world." End quote. We cannot see energy very easily with the human eye, and thus the world of unseen energy can be difficult for the mind to grasp without scientific measurements to verify what is taking place. Perhaps this is why the study of consciousness affecting our reality has been virtually untouched for so long. To help create a bridge between our physical and unseen world, scientific experiments using a technique called bioelectrophotography are being carried out. In these experiments, an assumption must be made that states the human body and consciousness is constantly emitting energy. Following this assumption, bioelectrophotography aims to capture these energy fields seen as a light around the body. In the metaphysical world, this energy emission is known as a person's aura, while in the scientific field, it is often referred to as our energy field. Dr. Karakov is not the only one studying the effects of the human mind, thoughts, and energy on our surrounding environment. The Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory has also been trying to wrap their heads around the subject and have concluded that the mind does in fact have a subtle capacity to influence the output of devices known as random event generators. A project that initially started when a student was curious to study the effects of the human mind and intention on the surrounding environment turned into a rigorous testing lab where Dr. Robert Jan and his lab assistant spent many hours experimenting to determine whether or not the mind has an effect on our physical world. Jan and his assistant were able to determine that the human mind's interactions with the machines demonstrated a relationship that was not physical in nature. The mind was able to affect and change outcomes of the machine in ways that were beyond explainable. In essence, consciousness was having an effect over the physical world. To determine the effects of the mind's intention on the physical world, they built several of the random number generator machines. The machines would essentially mimic a coin flip and record the results over time. One machine performed 200 flips per second and produced an average mean of 100 as one would expect. Left unattended, the machine would continue to produce results that suggested a 50-50 chance of producing either heads or tails. The interesting results came when human intention started to interact with the machine. What was once a random 50-50 chance of producing heads or tails began to deviate from expectation as the observer began to intend for the numbers to be higher or lower. While the effects of the mind over the machines was not large, it was enough that contemporary physics is unable to explain exactly what is happening. Perhaps this is where the quantum world can shed light?
Time has come to see the world as it is.
CollectiveEvolution.com. Scientific study shows meditators collapsing quantum systems at a distance. Posted by Arjun Walia, May 1st, 2014. Numerous scientists over many years have studied the role of consciousness and how it can directly influence our physical material world. Large amounts of research have been published which clearly demonstrate that yes, consciousness and what we perceive to be our physical material world are directly intertwined. I'll provide more examples of this towards the end of the article, but for now we are going to take a look at one. We've written about it numerous times. It's called the quantum double slit experiment, and it's a great example of how consciousness can affect our physical material world. A paper published in the peer-reviewed journal Physics Essays explains how this experiment has been used multiple times to explore the role of consciousness in shaping the nature of physical reality. In this experiment, a double-slit optical system was used to test the possible role of consciousness in the collapse of the quantum wave function. The ratio of the interference pattern's double-slit spectral power to its single-slit spectral power was predicted to decrease when attention was focused toward the double-slit as compared to away from it. The study found that factors associated with consciousness significantly correlated in predicted ways with perturbations in the double-slit interference pattern. Quote, observation not only disturbs what has to be measured, it produces it. We compel the electron to assume a definite position. We ourselves produce the results of the measurement. End quote. A number of experiments were conducted to measure perturbations in the wave function. In the first experiment, participants were instructed to direct their attention toward the double-slit apparatus or to withdraw their attention toward a task. At certain times, a computerized voice instructed them, saying, "Please influence the beam now," and for attention away, it said, "You may now relax." This first experiment was modestly in accordance with the consciousness collapse hypothesis, perturbations in the double-slit interference pattern. The second experiment was conducted at a Zen Buddhist temple, which was a great place to recruit meditators for the experiment. This time, quote, for audio feedback during attention away periods, the computer played a soft, continuous drone tone, and during attention towards periods, it played a musical note that changed in pitch to reflect the real-time value of R, which is perturbations in wave function. Participants were instructed to direct their attention toward the double-slit device as in the initial experiment. If they were successful, then the double-slit spectral power was predicted to decline, and in turn, the pitch of the musical note would also decline. End quote. This test finished after 19 participants participated in 31 sessions. At the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS laboratory, 3 meditators contributed 11 sessions and 4 non-meditators contributed 7 sessions. At the Zen Buddhist Temple, 12 meditators contributed 13 sessions. The tests were supervised and a double-slit apparatus was presented. This experiment provided more evidence, and in the IONS laboratory, the meditators showed superior performance as compared to the non-meditators. A third experiment was then conducted, using 33 sessions where 6 meditators contributed to 22 sessions and 7 non-meditators contributed to 11 sessions. The 22 meditator sessions resulted in a significant decline in the ratio of the interference pattern. The meditators here had an especially strong statistical effect. This experiment clearly supported the hypothesis. In the fourth experiment, 31 people contributed 51 sessions, and the experimental effect size observed in the study was 3 times greater than that observed in the first 4 experiments. The study goes on and consistently outlines a number of factors associated with consciousness. I focused on the ones using meditation, but there are more in the study, to collapse the quantum wave function or interfere with its pattern. Quote, the study found that factors associated with consciousness significantly correlated in predicted ways with perturbations in the double-slit interference pattern, end quote. This experiment is one of many that prove consciousness and our physical material world are intertwined. We recently published a study titled 10 Scientific Studies That Prove Consciousness Can Alter Our Physical Material World. A fundamental conclusion of new physics also acknowledges that the observer creates the reality. As observers, we are personally involved with the creation of our own reality. Physicists are being forced to admit that the universe is a mental construction. Pioneering physicist Sir James Jeans wrote, the stream of knowledge is heading toward a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a great machine. Mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. Get over it and accept the inarguable conclusion. The universe is immaterial/mental and spiritual. From R.C. Henry, The Mental Universe, Nature, 436:29,2005. Science is quickly catching up to ancient wisdom. Changing our world requires action, yes, but that action must come from a place of peace, love, cooperation, and understanding. Who is to say that meditation and direct intention towards what we would like to change is not the base of action? If you change within, manifestation without will begin to unfold, and that's exactly what's happening on our planet right now. If our hearts are in the right place and our intentions are pure, we will be provided with the necessary opportunities using action to implement change. This is why the role of consciousness and recognizing the role of consciousness is so important. It plays a large factor in creating global change on a mass scale. Albert Einstein, quote, says, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
This article's title is ESP Exists, Inside Sony's Corporate Research. It was written by Gene Semel on March 5, 2013. Why would one of the world's most successful and innovative technology corporations research a highly controversial subject and risky future product opportunities such as ESP, or extrasensory perception, and then, oh, by the way, tell the world they proved it existed? Unlikely? What company and why isn't this more widely known? That's just what I thought. I came across this fun fact while searching for information to help me understand a strange series of events that had occurred 6 years ago this month. Coincidentally, I happened to be working for this company when I found out. Described as anomalous processes of information or energy transfer, psi phenomenon is a very controversial subject. On one side, scientists, physicists, and PhDs attesting to its reality, and on the other, there are opponents who question the methods of study, the resulting data, and testimonies. The monumental power of electricity, now well controlled, was, at one time, an anomalous process of energy transfer. Like electricity, arguably the most significant development in mankind's history, from lightning strike to cell phone, things that seem impossible to dream of today often become the reality of the future. What does electricity, a subject so obviously understood today, have to do with other anomalous processes, such as having a thought about a loved one and then coincidentally receiving a call from them at the same time? How about those gut feelings or intuitions that so many times have saved a life, or many lives, under highly unusual circumstances? What about those unsettling accounts of communication at the moment of a loved one's death with the loved one far away? It's understandable that for many of us the last example appears quite fantastic, but those gut feelings and intuitions have more to them than we realize. Imagine the idea that roughly only 200 years ago, most of the world had no idea that lightning could one day, metaphorically speaking, be put into a bottle. In other words, a Walkman, Android, iPhone, etc. Wielding electricity in this sense would have been considered magic. What might have inspired us to attempt to wield lightning like Zeus atop Mount Olympus? Some suggest ancient discoveries of mystical or esoteric knowledge as a good place to begin our hunt. Dr. Electricity himself, Benjamin Franklin, without any doubt studied the geometric sciences of man hidden in the archives of secret societies. He wasn't the only one. He was preceded by other seekers of secret wisdom, people like William Gilbert, John Dee, and Francis Bacon, all of whom had close connections with Queen Elizabeth I and had significant impact on the world. The same goes for many other earth-changing individuals, such as Copernicus, Galileo, and Alexandria's bold beauty, Hypatia. These greats reinterpreted ancient texts and delivered the hidden messages back to the world in new form. The who's who list is long and impressive, with each giving credit to the ones who preceded them. It was Newton who said, quote, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants," end quote. Researchers of the esoteric aren't burned alive these days, but the same can't be said of their professional lives. Many face career-destroying ridicule. In the 1970s or thereabouts, the world was surprised to discover that the U.S. government, and many others, was investigating psychic phenomena or remote viewing. What magicians of an earlier age might have called clairvoyance, this hypothetical perceptive capability enables the viewer to locate and sketch structures, objects, people, and more for intelligence purposes. It might sound crazy, but one remote viewer was given the Legion of Merit Award for his success and service to the U.S. government. Even Jimmy Carter espoused its success. Having a skeptical perspective is very important to maintain an objective position, and the scientific method is an excellent way to ascertain the truth behind extraordinary claims. Incidentally, Roger Bacon, an early proponent of the scientific method, was also very interested in mystical texts and a practicing alchemist. Could it be that many of our modern discoveries aren't so new after all? My curiosity drove me to try remote viewing on my own. I expected nothing to come of it, but left my opinion at the door and, following the recommendations of remote viewers, meditated prior to performing the required actions. The results were impressive. I was unprepared for the details that emerged in my sketches and how closely they mirrored the target event. In other words, the unseen photo the viewer is tasked with describing during a session. I was driven to study the field for a very long time, considering the players involved and their credentials, funding sources, and claims. I was impressed by what seemed to be valid evidence for the remote viewing experience. In the technology field, most successful industry leaders are driven by a burning desire to create and innovate. It's the strongest motivation of all, perhaps even more than profit. This desire drives leaders to follow their muse to the extent that they can tolerate the risk that often precedes new discoveries. Sometimes it pans out and sometimes it doesn't. Being one of the first to develop portable and highly useful, not to mention fun technology, Sony Corporation is a technology power center. Many have followed in the company's footsteps, hoping to recreate the success of leaders who built the brand on the basis of continuing evolution, expanding our perception of the world through art, sound, technology, and great storytelling. Fearless pursuit of new possibilities by necessity requires a change of perspectives. Finding ways to measure anomalous energy transference and to uncover a commercial application for it was something Sony took seriously. In the company's labs, it was objectively and empirically researched for over a decade under the oversight of Sony senior researcher Yoichiro Sako. I had originally found Sako-san's contact information by searching through old patent filings and finding colleagues who worked with him. I was then able to cross-reference this information and find Sako-san in our internal email contact list. Searching this way was the only method of making contact. Imagine asking innocently about that around the office. After contacting Sako-san regarding the archives, I booked a flight to Tokyo. I arrived at Sony HQ in the incredible city of Tokyo a week before I'd have access to the documentation. Yoichiro Sako-san communicated with me through his friend and colleague Itaru Kawakami-san during this period. Sako-san himself was prevented from meeting with me due to an illness. I had been hopeful I would meet the man who inspired me so much, but access to the archives was exciting enough. The day finally arrived, and I made my way to the designated building in Sony Square and checked in with reception. I was shortly greeted by Kawakami-san, who immediately struck me as a serious and intelligent person. He was very business-focused, but very generous with his time and patience. He escorted me a short distance down several corridors until I was brought to a fairly large conference room. All of the furniture in the room had been placed against the walls to allow room for all of the research documents, which were organized into 30 or so white boxes, lined up row after row. It was impressive and, frankly, very daunting, since I couldn't read Japanese at all and spoke very little of the language. Kawakami-san introduced me to his colleague, Mitsuru Takehara-san, and then left me to explore the contents of these boxes on my own. It seemed that these boxes had not been opened since the research was concluded. I felt the sincerity, the purpose, and the adrenaline of the hunt to find out what's going on with this phenomenon. The intent was palpable. I spent the majority of the day investigating the contents of the archive and couldn't believe my eyes. Page after page of experiments validating human extrasensory phenomena of various kinds, not to mention the correspondence from scientists and academics around the world who communicated with Sako-san, expressing their encouragement of this research. I was in awe with the depth of the study. Many varieties of experiments were conducted under highly controlled conditions. In the cases below, a tiny piece of paper with an image drawn on it would be placed in the ear of the subject, who was then able to produce the mirrored images by means other than sight. The results of the experiments are amazing, especially considering that some of the remote viewing experiments were conducted with children who demonstrated powerful abilities of what can only be described as clairvoyance, to use the common term. The data corroborated the memorable statement that Sony spokesman Masanobu Sakaguchi had given to the South China Morning Post after the story about the company's research broke, quote, "We found out, experimentally, that yes, ESP exists, but that any practical application of this knowledge is not likely in the foreseeable future," end quote. After approximately a decade of study, the Esper Lab program was shuttered. Sako-san has written about his research and memories in books which have been printed in Japan. Is ESP real? Look back at the decades various corporations and government powers have spent researching ESP phenomena and decide for yourself. How would that happen unless there was something to it? Otherwise they wouldn't keep it up, would they? Could it be that many people have been fooled for that long? The answer is simply no. Whatever is happening, I think that one day soon, it will be understood to be just another fascinating aspect of nature. The borders of consciousness, like the frontiers of space and time, are far from being fully explored and mapped out.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
On the next episode, I'll talk about some more strange experiences I had growing up. Nothing is true, everything is permitted.
Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
Fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is changing.